This experience taught me that the greatest mistake is to be consistently predictable in your approach. Leaders who always rely on force become tyrants who rule through fear alone, eventually facing rebellion when their strength wanes. Leaders who always rely on cunning become known as manipulators, losing credibility when their schemes are exposed. But leaders who can authentically embody both approaches become truly formidable, because opponents never know which version they will face. The key to mastering this duality lies in understanding that both the lion and the fox serve the same fundamental purpose: protecting your interests and advancing your goals. The choice between them should be tactical, not emotional. Some situations require the clarity and decisiveness of strength. Others require the patience and subtlety of intelligence. The effective leader assesses each circumstance and chooses the appropriate tool. In my own development, learning to embrace the lion's nature was more challenging than developing the fox's cunning. My diplomatic training had prepared me well for subtle negotiation and indirect influence, but learning to be direct, forceful, and uncompromising when necessary required overcoming years of conditioning that equated niceness with virtue. I had to learn that there are times when being direct and firm is actually kinder than being indirect and accommodating, because it prevents larger conflicts and misunderstandings. I witnessed the destructive power of misplaced generosity while studying the decline of the Medici Bank, once the most powerful financial institution in Europe. The bank's records revealed a pattern that haunts every leader who confuses kindness with wisdom. The generous fool destroys not only himself, but everyone who depends on him. Lorenzo de' Medici, known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, embodied this tragic flaw. His generosity became legendary throughout Florence. He funded artists, supported scholars, underwrote public festivals, and extended credit to allies who could never repay their debts. The people adored him for his largesse, but this same generosity slowly bankrupted the institution that supported his family's power. The bank's ledgers tell the story. With brutal mathematical precision, loans extended for political favor rather than sound collateral, interest rates reduced or forgiven to maintain friendships, investment decisions made to support allies rather than generate returns. Each individual act of generosity seemed noble in isolation, but collectively they created a hemorrhage that no amount of goodwill could stop. Lorenzo's tragedy was not that he was generous, but that he was strategically generous. He gave to everyone who asked, without calculating the long-term consequences or considering whether his generosity served any purpose beyond momentary gratitude. He confused being liked with being respected, popularity with power, and good intentions with good leadership. This taught me that true leadership requires what I call calculated generosity, giving in ways that advance your larger objectives, while genuinely helping others. The effective leader asks, not can I afford to be generous, but will this generosity create sustainable benefits for both parties? Strategic giving builds lasting relationships and reinforces your position. Indiscriminate giving creates dependency and eventual resentment. I learned to distinguish between three types of requests: those that deserve immediate support because they align with your goals, those that deserve consideration because they might create future advantages, and those that deserve polite refusal because they serve no purpose beyond momentary gratification for the requester. The generous fool says yes to all three categories. The strategic leader responds differently to each. When someone requests your time, resources, or support, the first question should not be whether you like them or want to help, but whether doing so serves your larger mission. If the answer is yes, be generous quickly and completely. If the answer is no, be kind but firm in your refusal. If the answer is uncertain, gather more information before deciding. The most powerful leaders I observed were often surprisingly generous, but their generosity always served strategic purposes. They funded projects that enhanced their reputation, supported people who could advance their interests, and invested in initiatives that aligned with their values while creating practical benefits. Their giving strengthened rather than weakened their position. This principle applies equally to emotional generosity, the giving of attention, approval, and encouragement. Leaders who dispense praise indiscriminately find that their approval becomes worthless. When everyone receives the same level of recognition, regardless of performance, recognition loses its motivational power. Conversely, leaders who reserve their highest praise for exceptional achievement find that people work harder to earn it. I also observed how generous leaders often enable poor performance by making excuses for incompetence, extending deadlines for unrealistic reasons, and accepting substandard work to avoid difficult conversations. This type of generosity may feel kind in the moment, but it ultimately hurts everyone involved. The incompetent person never receives the feedback needed to improve, while others who perform well see their efforts devalued. The mathematics of generosity are unforgiving. Resources given without strategic purpose are resources unavailable for strategic opportunities. Time spent helping people who cannot or will not reciprocate is time unavailable for advancing your mission. Energy invested in relationships that drain rather than energize you is energy unavailable for relationships that could transform your capabilities. Learning to say no gracefully became one of my most valuable skills. I discovered that people actually respect leaders who have clear boundaries more than leaders who agree to everything. When someone knows that earning your support requires meeting specific standards, they value that support more highly than generosity given without conditions. The transformation from generous fool to strategic giver requires developing comfort with disappointing people in small ways to avoid disappointing them in large ways. It means understanding that sustainable generosity requires sustainable resources, which requires making choices about how those resources are deployed. Most importantly, it means recognizing that the leader who tries to help everyone helps no one effectively. The most challenging lesson I learned about leadership came from witnessing Cesare Borgia's handling of the massacre at Sinigaglia, where he eliminated his rebellious captains in a single, carefully orchestrated event. This demonstrated that sometimes the kindest long-term action requires what appears to be cruelty in the short term. True leaders must develop the stomach for necessary harshness. Borgia's situation was instructive. Several of his military commanders had formed a conspiracy against him, plotting to divide his territories among themselves. A nice leader might have tried negotiation, attempted to win them back through concessions, or hoped that loyalty could be rebuilt through renewed generosity. Borgia understood that such approaches would only signal weakness and invite further rebellion. Instead, he lured the conspirators to Sinigaglia under the pretense of reconciliation, then had them arrested and executed in a single swift operation. To observers, this seemed brutally treacherous, but Borgia's calculation was precise. Eliminating these men quickly and decisively prevented a civil war that would have killed thousands of soldiers and civilians. His apparent cruelty actually minimized overall suffering. This taught me that leadership often requires what I call surgical cruelty, the willingness to cause limited, targeted pain to prevent unlimited, widespread suffering. The leader who cannot bring himself to fire an incompetent employee allows that person's poor performance to demoralize the entire team. The leader who cannot enforce standards enables a culture where mediocrity becomes acceptable and excellence becomes rare. I learned to recognize situations where kindness becomes complicity with harmful behavior. When someone repeatedly fails to meet expectations, despite support and coaching, continued tolerance is not compassionate as enabling. When a team member's negative attitude affects others' morale, avoiding confrontation is not peaceful. It is allowing one person's problems to become everyone's problems. The most effective leaders, I observed, had mastered the art of being hard on problems while remaining supportive of people. They could deliver harsh feedback about performance while maintaining respect for the individual. They could enforce consequences for bad decisions while preserving relationships for future cooperation. They separated actions from identity, addressing what people did wrong without attacking who they were. This distinction is crucial because it allows for what I call redemptive harshness correction that serves the person being corrected as well as the larger organization. When you address someone's poor performance directly and specifically, you give them the opportunity to improve. When you avoid difficult conversations to spare their feelings, you deny them the chance to grow and eventually force yourself into more drastic measures. I also discovered that people actually prefer leaders who will be straight with them about problems, rather than leaders who smile while harboring resentment. Clear, direct feedback, even when it is uncomfortable, creates trust because it demonstrates that the leader cares enough to invest in improvement. Avoiding difficult conversations creates confusion and eventual breakdown. The timing and manner of necessary harshness matters enormously. Effective leaders deliver correction privately when possible, publicly when necessary, and immediately when the situation demands it. They focus on specific behaviors rather than general character flaws. They combine criticism with clear expectations for improvement and support for achieving those expectations. Most importantly, they take responsibility for creating the conditions that require harsh measures rather than blaming others for forcing their hand. When Borgia eliminated his rebellious captains, he did not claim to be the victim of their betrayal. He acknowledged that the situation had reached a point where decisive action was necessary, and took that action without hesitation or apology. Learning to exercise necessary cruelty required overcoming my instinctive desire to be liked by everyone. I had to accept that being an effective leader sometimes means being temporarily unpopular with people who need correction. I learned that the leader who tries to maintain universal approval usually ends up respected by no one, while the leader who is willing to enforce standards earns the respect of those who matter most. The transformation came when I realized that avoiding necessary difficult conversations was actually a form of selfishness. I was prioritizing my own comfort over my responsibility to the people and mission I served. True compassion sometimes requires the courage to cause discomfort in service of long-term benefit. The leader who lacks this courage condemns everyone under their influence to mediocrity. I learned about the invisible chains that bind people-pleasers through studying the Pazzi conspiracy documents, which revealed how enemies systematically exploit the predictable behavior of those who cannot say no. The nice guy becomes everyone's servant because his need for approval makes him controllable by anyone willing to withdraw their affection. The Pazzi family understood this psychological vulnerability perfectly when they planned their attempt to overthrow the Medici. They studied Lorenzo de' Medici's patterns, identifying his weakness for flattery and his reluctance to disappoint those who claimed to need his help. They exploited these traits by positioning themselves as loyal allies, seeking his guidance and support, all while planning his assassination. The conspiracy documents show how they manipulated Lorenzo's generosity against him. They requested meetings at inconvenient times, knowing he would agree rather than disappoint them. They asked for favors that put him in compromising positions, understanding that his desire to maintain harmony would override his better judgment. They used his own kindness as a weapon to orchestrate his destruction. This taught me that the person who cannot refuse any request becomes a tool in the hands of those who would use them. When your response to every appeal is predictably positive, you lose the power of choice. Others begin making plans that depend on your compliance, and your inability to disappoint them traps you in obligations that serve their interests rather than your own. The invisible chains of people-pleasing are forged through small compromises. that seem harmless individually but collectively create a prison of obligations. Each time you say yes when you mean no, you train others to expect your compliance. Each time you prioritize someone else's comfort over your own judgment, you teach them that your boundaries are negotiable. Each time you accept unreasonable requests to maintain peace, you signal that pressuring you works. I observed this pattern repeatedly among leaders who wondered why they felt overwhelmed despite having talented teams. Investigation revealed that they had become bottlenecks in their own organizations. Because they could not delegate authority effectively, they were too concerned about burdening others or making demands that might create conflict. Their teams learned to bring every decision to them because they never said, "Handle this yourself." The mathematics of people-pleasing are devastating. If you spend your time responding to everyone else's priorities, you have no time left for your own. If you use your resources to solve everyone else's problems, you have no resources available for pursuing your own opportunities. If you exhaust your energy managing everyone else's emotions, you have no energy left for your own growth and development. Breaking free from these invisible chains requires developing what I call strategic selfishness, the understanding that serving your own interests effectively enables you to serve others more powerfully. The leader who protects his time can invest it in activities that benefit everyone. The leader who manages her resources carefully can deploy them for maximum impact. The leader who maintains his energy can sustain effort over the long term. This transformation begins with recognizing that saying no to good requests creates space for saying yes to great opportunities. Every minute spent on activities that do not advance your mission is a minute unavailable for activities that could transform your capabilities. Every dollar spent on nice-to-have purchases is a dollar unavailable for must-have investments. I learned to distinguish between legitimate requests that deserved consideration and manipulative demands designed to exploit my desire for approval. Legitimate requests came with specific details, reasonable timelines, and understanding that no was an acceptable answer. Manipulative demands came with emotional pressure, artificial urgency, and implied consequences for refusal. The most insidious aspect of people-pleasing is how it masquerades as virtue while actually serving vanity. The person who cannot disappoint others often claims to be selfless and caring, but investigation usually reveals a deep need for approval and a fear of conflict. True generosity comes from strength and choice, not from weakness and compulsion. Developing immunity to manipulation required accepting that some people would be disappointed by my refusal to serve their convenience. I had to become comfortable with others' temporary displeasure in order to maintain my own long-term effectiveness. I discovered that most people actually respected clear boundaries more than unlimited availability, and that those who did not respect boundaries were precisely the people whose approval was least valuable. The liberation came when I realized that my desire to be liked by everyone was actually preventing me from being loved by anyone. Superficial, universal approval is far less satisfying than deep respect from people whose opinions matter. The nice guy who tries to please everyone ends up valued by no one. My intelligence network reports taught me one of the most counterintuitive principles of leadership. You need strategic enemies to define your strength and unite your allies. The leader who tries to be universally liked eliminates the creative tension that drives excellence and the clarity that comes from choosing sides. Opposition, properly managed, becomes a source of power rather than a drain on resources. Through my network of informants across Italy, I observed how the most effective rulers cultivated what I call productive enmity, relationships with opponents who served to clarify their own position and motivate their supporters. These leaders understood that having clearly defined enemies created opportunities that universal friendliness could never provide. Pope Julius II demonstrated this principle masterfully in his conflicts with various Italian princes. Rather than trying to maintain diplomatic relations with everyone, he chose his enemies strategically, picking fights that would enhance his reputation for strength, while uniting his allies around common cause. His conflicts with Venice allowed him to position himself as the defender of Italian independence against foreign influence. His disputes with France gave him credibility as a leader who could not be intimidated by superior military power. The intelligence I gathered revealed that Julius deliberately escalated certain conflicts because opposition served his larger strategic purposes. When Venetian ambassadors offered reasonable compromises to avoid confrontation, he rejected them not because the terms were unacceptable, but because accepting them would have denied him the benefits of being seen as uncompromising. The conflict itself was more valuable than the resolution. This taught me that strategic enemies serve multiple functions. They provide motivation for your supporters, clarity about your values, and opportunities to demonstrate your strength. When people see you standing firm against opposition, they understand what you represent more clearly than any mission statement could communicate. When they see you win conflicts against worthy opponents, they gain confidence in your ability to protect their interests. The key is choosing your enemies as carefully as you choose your friends. Productive enemies are those whose opposition enhances your reputation and whose defeat advances your goals. They should be powerful enough that victory over them means something, but not so powerful that defeat becomes inevitable. They should represent principles you genuinely oppose, not just convenience targets for conflict. I learned to distinguish between enemies who drain your energy and enemies who focus it. Some opponents attack randomly and create chaos that serves no purpose. Others challenge you in ways that force you to become stronger, smarter, and more disciplined. The latter type of enemy is actually a gift. They provide the resistance that builds muscle. My reports also revealed how skilled leaders convert enemies into unwitting allies by goading them into overreach. When opponents become so focused on defeating you that they make strategic mistakes, their own actions serve your interests. Julius II was particularly skilled at this, provoking enemies into positions that made them look unreasonable, while making him appear restrained and justified. The process of enemy conversion works because sustained opposition reveals character on both sides. When you respond to attacks with dignity and strategic thinking, while your opponent responds with desperation and poor judgment, neutral observers begin to favor your position. The enemy who attacks you unfairly actually builds sympathy for your cause among people who might otherwise remain indifferent. I also discovered that having known enemies simplifies decision-making because it clarifies your priorities. When someone opposes your core mission, their preferences become useful reverse indicators. What they hate, you should probably embrace. What they promote, you should probably question. Their opposition serves as a navigation tool for your own strategic choices. The most sophisticated application of this principle involves creating controlled conflict that serves everyone's interests. When two strong leaders publicly disagree about methods while privately agreeing about goals, their conflict can generate attention and energy that benefits both sides. The key is ensuring that the conflict remains focused on issues rather than becoming personal. Learning to embrace strategic enmity required overcoming my instinctive desire for universal harmony. I had to accept that some level of conflict is inevitable in any leadership position, and that trying to avoid it entirely often creates worse problems later. The leader who stands for nothing controversial stands for nothing meaningful. The transformation came when I realized that my enemies were often more honest about my weaknesses than my friends were. Their attacks forced me to examine and strengthen areas of vulnerability that supporters might have politely ignored. Opposition became a form of free consulting that helped me improve my strategies and shore up my defenses. Most importantly, I learned that the goal is not to destroy your enemies, but to make them irrelevant through superior performance. The ultimate victory is not conquest, but making opposition pointless because your success becomes undeniable. I learned the devastating importance of reputation management by studying the fall of Pier Soderini, Florence's leader whose personal virtues became political liabilities because he never understood that perception shapes reality more powerfully than facts. A leader's reputation is a fortress that either protects against attacks or invites them, depending on how carefully it has been constructed. Soderini was genuinely good mannerist, hard-working, and devoted to Florence's welfare, but he made the fatal error of believing that good intentions and solid performance would automatically create the reputation he deserved. He focused on governing well, while ignoring how his governance was perceived by those who could enhance or destroy his position. The records of his downfall reveal a pattern that destroys many capable leaders. He allowed others to define his image, rather than actively shaping it himself. His enemies spread narratives about his weakness and indecision, while his supporters remained silent, assuming that his good work would speak for itself. By the time Soderini recognized the problem, the negative perception had become so entrenched that contradicting evidence was dismissed as propaganda. This taught me that reputation is not a reflection of reality, is a construction that requires as much strategic attention as any other aspect of leadership. The leader who neglects reputation management is like a general who ignores intelligence gathering. They may fight bravely, but they fight blind against enemies who see them clearly. Building a fortress of reputation requires understanding what I call the perception-reality loop. People's beliefs about your capabilities influence how they interact with you, which influences your actual results, which reinforces their beliefs about your capabilities. If people believe you are weak, they will test that weakness, and their testing may actually create the weakness they expected to find. Conversely, if people believe you are formidable, they will approach you with respect and caution, making it easier for you to achieve the results that reinforce their belief in your formidability. The leader who is perceived as powerful often becomes powerful simply because others treat them as if they already are. I observed this principle operating in my interactions with various Italian princes. Those who had cultivated reputations for decisiveness found that others came to them with better proposals and fewer demands. Those who had reputations for generosity were constantly approached by people seeking favors. Those who had reputations for unreliability discovered that opportunities went to others before being offered to them. The construction of reputation requires consistent signals across all your interactions. Every letter you write, every meeting you attend, every decision you make either reinforces or undermines the image you want to project. The leader who appears strong in formal negotiations but weak in casual conversations creates confusion that enemies can exploit. I learned to identify the key audiences whose perceptions mattered most and to tailor my reputation management accordingly. Some audiences needed to see strength and decisiveness. Others needed to see wisdom and restraint. Still others needed to see loyalty and trustworthiness. The effective leader develops different facets of their reputation for different groups while maintaining overall consistency. The most powerful reputations combine apparent contradictions that keep opponents off balance. The leader who is known for both generosity and ruthlessness, both flexibility and firmness, both humility and confidence. These paradoxes make you unpredictable, which is a significant tactical advantage in any competitive situation. I also discovered that reputation management requires strategic vulnerability, occasionally allowing others to see controlled weakness. That makes your strength more credible. The leader who appears invulnerable in all circumstances seems inhuman and creates resentment. The leader who shows appropriate uncertainty in complex situations appears wise and thoughtful. The timing of reputation building is crucial because perceptions, once formed, resist change. It is far easier to create the right impression initially than to correct a wrong impression later. This means that new leaders have a brief window of opportunity to establish their image before others form fixed opinions about their capabilities and character. During this critical period, every action carries disproportionate weight. A single demonstration of strength or weakness, competence or confusion, integrity or duplicity can define how people view you for years afterward. The wise leader choreographs these early interactions carefully, ensuring that first impressions support rather than undermine their long-term objectives. Maintaining reputation requires constant vigilance because enemies will always seek to exploit any inconsistency between your image and your actions. The leader who claims to value honesty but is caught in a deception, who preaches fiscal responsibility but spends wastefully, who demands high performance but delivers mediocre results, such inconsistencies become weapons in the hands of opponents. Learned that the strongest reputations are built on a foundation of competence rather than charm. People may initially be impressed by charisma, but they ultimately respect results. The leader who consistently delivers on promises, who solves problems others cannot solve, who creates value that others can see and measures, such a leader builds unassailable credibility that survives temporary setbacks and personal attacks. The most important lesson was that reputation is not vanity but strategy. In a world where people make decisions based on limited information, your reputation often determines which opportunities you receive, which allies you attract, and which enemies you face. The leader who builds wisely discovers that a strong reputation makes every other aspect of leadership easier and more effective. Cesar Borgia's appointment of Ramiro de Orco as his lieutenant taught me one of the most sophisticated principles of leadership: how to accomplish necessary but unpopular tasks while maintaining your own reputation for fairness and wisdom. The strategic leader learns to delegate not just authority, but also the burden of being disliked for difficult decisions. When Borgia conquered the Romagna region, he faced the classic leadership dilemma. The area required harsh measures to establish order, but implementing those measures would make him hated by the people he needed to govern. His solution was brilliant in its calculated cynicism. He appointed Ramiro de Orco as his representative and gave him broad authority to restore peace through whatever means necessary. Ramiro proved extremely effective at his assigned role. He crushed banditry, eliminated corruption, and imposed order throughout the region. But his methods were necessarily brutal, and the people grew to hate him for the harshness of his rule. Borgia, meanwhile, remained physically distant from these activities, allowing Ramiro to bear the full weight of popular resentment. Once order was established and Ramiro had served his purpose, Borgia made his masterstroke. He publicly executed Ramiro in the town square, claiming to be shocked by his lieutenant's excesses. The same people who had suffered under Ramiro's rule suddenly cheered Borgia as their liberator. In a single action, Borgia had eliminated the source of popular grievance while demonstrating his own commitment to justice. This taught me that effective leaders must sometimes create distance between themselves and the implementation of unpopular policies. This is not cowardice or dishonesty, is strategic necessity. The leader who personally delivers every piece of bad news, who directly enforces every unpopular rule, who takes credit for every difficult decision, becomes the focus of all resentment and frustration. By contrast, the leader who builds systems and delegates authority for enforcement can maintain the relationships necessary for long-term effectiveness. People can continue to see you as reasonable and fair while still experiencing the consequences of violating your standards. The separation between policy creation and policy enforcement allows you to remain above the day-to-day friction of implementation, learned to identify tasks that required this strategic distance, firing incompetent employees, enforcing unpopular cost-cutting measures, delivering disappointing news about resources or opportunities, and investigating potential misconduct. These activities are necessary for organizational health, but handling them personally often damages the relationships you need for other aspects of leadership. The key is building systems that enforce standards automatically rather than requiring your personal intervention. Well-designed processes, clear policies, and empowered lieutenants can handle much of the unpleasant work of leadership while leaving you free to focus on vision, strategy, and relationship building. Your authority backs these systems, but your personal reputation remains protected from their operations. This principle applies equally to positive delegation, allowing others to take credit for popular successes while you maintain strategic control. The leader who insists on personal recognition for every achievement creates resentment among team members and reduces their motivation to excel. The leader who shares credit generously while maintaining clear accountability builds loyalty and encourages innovation. I observed how the most sophisticated leaders developed what I call reputation arbitrage. They took personal responsibility for long-term vision and strategy while delegating responsibility for short-term implementation and tactics. This allowed them to be associated with success and progress, while avoiding association with the inevitable friction and disappointment that accompany any significant change. The practical application requires careful selection of lieutenants who understand their role in this system. They must be competent enough to handle difficult tasks effectively, loyal enough to accept responsibility for unpopular outcomes, and wise enough to understand that temporary unpopularity serves the larger mission. In return, they receive real authority, valuable experience, and eventual advancement to positions where others handle implementation for them. Learning to delegate dirty work required overcoming my instinctive desire to control every aspect of important decisions. I had to accept that empowering others to act on my behalf sometimes meant accepting results that differed from what I would have achieved personally. The trade-off between perfect control and strategic distance usually favored distance. Even when the immediate results were less than ideal, the transformation came when I realized that taking personal responsibility for every aspect of leadership was actually a form of arrogance, assumed that only I could handle difficult situations properly. Developing capable lieutenants and trusting them with meaningful authority ultimately served the organization better than my personal involvement in every decision. My decision to pardon Francesco Vettori after his family's opposition to my return to Florence taught me that mercy, properly timed and strategically deployed, becomes one of the most powerful tools in a leader's arsenal. But mercy that appears weak or predictable loses all its force. The art lies in making forgiveness seem both unexpected and deserved. Vettori had every reason to expect harsh treatment when I regained influence in Florentine politics. His family had actively worked against my return, spreading rumors about my loyalty and competence. According to the logic of political revenge, I should have moved quickly to marginalize him and his allies. Instead, I chose a different path, one that transformed an enemy into a devoted supporter. Rather than ignoring his opposition or pretending it had not happened, I acknowledged it directly in our first meeting. I told him that I understood his family's concerns and respected their right to advocate for what they believed served Florence best. Then I offered him a position of real responsibility in my administration, making it clear that I valued competence over past loyalty. The effect was immediate and lasting. Vettori, expecting punishment or exile, instead received trust and opportunity. His gratitude was profound, but more importantly, his commitment became absolute. Having experienced mercy when he deserved judgment, he became one of my most reliable allies. Others who had opposed me watched this interaction and began to reconsider their own positions. This taught me that unexpected mercy creates a debt that cannot be repaid with money or service alone. It can only be repaid with loyalty. When you have the power to destroy someone and choose instead to elevate them, you create a psychological bond that is often stronger than blood relationships. The person who owes their position to your mercy will defend that position by defending you. But mercy without strength behind it appears weak rather than magnanimous. The reason my forgiveness of Vettori was powerful was precisely because everyone knew I could have chosen differently. If I had lacked the authority to punish him, pardoning him would have seemed like necessity rather than choice. Mercy only impresses when it represents a conscious decision to restrain power, not an inability to exercise it. I learned to distinguish between mercy that serves strategic purposes and mercy that merely avoids difficult decisions. Strategic mercy is selective, unexpected, and clearly chosen rather than compelled. It creates specific benefits, converting enemies, demonstrating strength, or setting precedents for future behavior. Weak mercy is indiscriminate, predictable, and appears to result from inability to make hard choices. The timing of mercy is crucial to its effectiveness. Forgiveness granted too quickly appears weak or insincere. Forgiveness granted too late appears calculated or desperate. The most powerful mercy comes at the moment when punishment seems inevitable and justified. That is when choosing a different path creates the greatest impact on both the recipient and observers. I also discovered that mercy must be paired with clear expectations for future behavior. When I pardoned Vettori, I made it clear that this was a one-time opportunity to demonstrate loyalty through action rather than words. The mercy came with implicit conditions. Continued opposition would not receive similar treatment. This clarity prevented others from misinterpreting kindness as weakness. The most sophisticated application of strategic mercy involves creating situations where others can earn forgiveness through positive action, rather than simply pardoning past offenses. The wise leader creates opportunities for opponents to demonstrate their conversion through valuable service. This transforms the act of mercy from a gift into an investment that returns dividends over time. I learned that public mercy often has more impact than private mercy because it sends messages to multiple audiences simultaneously. When others see you forgive a worthy opponent, they understand that you are secure enough to convert enemies rather than destroy them. This confidence attracts people who want to ally themselves with strength rather than fear it. The principle also applies to smaller daily interactions, where the option to hold grudges or demand apologies presents itself. The leader who quickly forgives minor slights and focuses on future performance rather than past mistakes creates an environment where people feel safe to take risks and admit errors. This psychological safety often leads to better long-term results than strict accountability for every failure. Learning to exercise strategic mercy required overcoming my natural desire for vindication and recognition of wrongs committed against me. I had to accept that being right was less important than being effective, and that transforming opponents often served my interests better than defeating them. The most satisfying victories were those that converted enemies into allies rather than simply eliminating opposition. While writing my comedy, The Mandrake, I discovered how humor and charm could serve as the perfect delivery system for uncomfortable truths about power and human nature. The most effective leaders master what I call the pleasant mask of authority, ability to make difficult medicine go down smoothly while ensuring it still works as intended. The play allowed me to explore themes of deception, manipulation, and moral flexibility through characters who made audiences laugh while demonstrating principles that might have seemed threatening in a political treatise. By wrapping sharp insights in entertaining stories, I found that people would accept and remember lessons they might have rejected if presented directly. This taught me that the manner of delivery often matters more than the content of the message. People resist being told they are wrong, but they enjoy discovering new perspectives through stories and examples. They reject direct criticism of their beliefs, but they embrace insights that help them feel clever and sophisticated. The leader who masters this distinction can influence others while maintaining their goodwill. I learned to use what I call strategic charm-like ability, deployed to advance specific objectives rather than simple popularity. This involves studying your audience carefully to understand what they value, what they fear, and what they want to believe about themselves. Then you craft your message to align with these psychological patterns while advancing your own goals. The key is authenticity within strategy. Effective charm cannot be pure manipulation because people sense insincerity and eventually rebel against it. Instead, you must find genuine points of connection with others while choosing which aspects of yourself to emphasize in different situations. Everyone has multiple facets to their personality. The strategic leader knows which facets to highlight with which audiences. I observed this principle in operation during diplomatic receptions, where the same leader might be stern with military commanders, warm with merchants, intellectual with scholars, and paternal with citizens. Each interaction was genuine, but each emphasized different aspects of their character to achieve maximum influence with that particular group. The most sophisticated application involves making others feel intelligent and important while guiding them toward conclusions that serve your purposes. Instead of telling people what to think, you create situations where they reach the right conclusions on their own. This approach is more time-consuming than direct instruction, but it creates deeper commitment because people support ideas they believe they discovered themselves. I learned to distinguish between superficial charm that merely seeks approval and strategic charm that builds genuine influence. Superficial charm focuses on being liked in the moment through flattery and accommodation. Strategic charm focuses on being respected over time through competence and reliability wrapped in pleasant social skills. The pleasant mask must never completely obscure your authority, or people will forget that you have the power to enforce your will when necessary. The goal is not to appear harmless, but to appear reasonable. Others should understand that you prefer cooperation to compulsion, but they should never doubt your willingness to compel when cooperation fails. This balance requires what I call calibrated revelation, gradually allowing others to see the steel beneath the silk as your relationship deepens and their respect grows. Early interactions should emphasize charm and commonality. As trust develops, you can reveal more of your expectations and standards. Eventually, those who work closely with you should understand both your pleasant nature and your firm boundaries. I also discovered that humor serves as an excellent diagnostic tool for reading people's true reactions. How someone responds to a joke often reveals more about their real thoughts than their formal statements do. The person who laughs at humor directed against your enemies signals their support. The person who remains uncomfortable reveals potential disloyalty or conflicting values. The most effective leaders I observed had mastered the art of being simultaneously formidable and approachable. They could discuss the most serious matters with lightness when appropriate, and they could shift to complete seriousness when the situation demanded it. This flexibility kept others slightly off balance, while making interactions generally pleasant and productive. Learning to maintain the pleasant mask required developing genuine interest in others rather than forcing artificial enthusiasm. I found that most people become more interesting when you take time to understand their motivations and expertise. This authentic curiosity made charm easier to maintain, because it was rooted in real appreciation rather than strategic necessity alone. The transformation came when I realized that being pleasant while wielding authority was not duplicity but skill, The same way a surgeon can be gentle while cutting, or a teacher can be kind while demanding excellence, the manner and the substance serve different purposes, but both are necessary for maximum effectiveness. My work on the ordinance for the militia revealed how true leadership involves creating systems that enforce necessary standards automatically, without requiring constant personal intervention. The most sophisticated leaders build institutions that do the hard work of maintaining discipline and excellence, even when they are not present to supervise directly. When I proposed replacing Florence's reliance on mercenary forces with a citizen militia, I was not simply advocating for military reform, was demonstrating how to solve the fundamental leadership challenge of scale. A single person, no matter how capable, cannot personally manage every decision and interaction in a large organization. The solution is to create processes and structures that embody your principles and implement them consistently. The militia ordinance established clear standards for recruitment, training, equipment, and conduct. It defined consequences for various types of failure and rewards for exceptional performance. Most importantly, it created a chain of command that could function effectively without my daily involvement. The system itself became the enforcer of discipline, allowing leaders at every level to focus on strategy rather than constant supervision. This taught me that the leader who tries to personally handle every important decision creates a bottleneck that limits the organization's growth and effectiveness. Worse, it creates dependency when the leader is absent. Activity stops because no one else has the authority or knowledge to act. The wise leader builds systems that function independently while remaining aligned with his vision and values. Creating effective systems requires what I call institutionalized wisdom, bedding your best thinking into processes that others can follow even when they lack your experience or judgment. This means documenting not just what should be done, but why it should be done, and how to adapt when circumstances change. The goal is to give others the tools to think like you would think in situations you cannot personally address. I learned to identify which aspects of leadership required personal attention and which could be vision setting, strategic planning, and key relationship building generally required my direct involvement. Routine operations, standard procedures, and predictable problem-solving could be handled through well-designed systems managed by capable lieutenants. The most effective systems I designed included built-in feedback mechanisms that allowed me to monitor results without micromanaging processes, regular reports, spot audits, and exception notifications kept me informed about organizational performance while allowing daily operations to proceed without my constant oversight. This approach preserved my time for high-value activities while maintaining quality control. I also discovered that good systems must be robust enough to handle the predictable tendency of people to find shortcuts and workarounds. Any process that depends on everyone consistently choosing the hard path over the easy path will eventually fail. Effective systems make the right behavior easier than the wrong behavior, or at least make the consequences of wrong behavior swift and certain. The militia ordinance included provisions for regular inspection and evaluation because I understood that what gets measured gets managed. Standards that are not regularly assessed gradually deteriorate as people test boundaries and find that violations go unnoticed. The system had to monitor itself and provide feedback to leadership about its own effectiveness. Building systems that survive your departure requires training others to understand not just the procedures, but the principles behind them. When people understand why certain approaches work, they can adapt those approaches to new situations rather than blindly following scripts that may become obsolete. This deeper understanding creates organizational resilience and innovation. Learned that the transition from personal leadership to institutional leadership is often the most difficult challenge successful leaders face. It requires letting go of direct control while maintaining influence through the systems you have created. It means trusting others to implement your vision, even when they might do things differently than you would do them personally. The most sophisticated application involves creating systems that improve themselves over time through the accumulated wisdom of everyone who uses them. Well-designed processes capture successful innovations and incorporate them into standard practice, while eliminating approaches that prove ineffective. The system becomes smarter than any individual who works within it. The validation of this approach came when the militia I had organized continued to function effectively long after my direct involvement ended. The standards I had established, the training I had developed, and the leadership structure I had created proved capable of maintaining discipline and performance. Without my personal supervision, the institution had become independent of its founder while remaining true to its founding principles. This taught me that the ultimate measure of leadership is not what you accomplish while you are present, but what continues to happen according to your vision after you are gone. The leader who builds lasting systems creates influence that extends far beyond their personal tenure. During my years of exile from Florence, I learned one of the most powerful tools in the arsenal of influence: strategic silence. Stripped of official position and formal authority, I discovered that withholding my attention, approval, and participation could be more compelling than any speech or action. Sometimes the most persuasive thing you can do is nothing at all. My letters from this period reveal a man learning to wield absence as a form of presence. Former colleagues who had dismissed me when I held office suddenly sought my opinions when I no longer offered them freely. People who had taken my counsel for granted began to value it highly when it became scarce. The simple act of withdrawal created demand that had not existed when I was readily available. This taught me that attention is currency. Unlike any currency, its value is determined by scarcity. The leader who responds immediately to every request, who always makes themselves available, who constantly offers unsolicited advice, devalues their own contributions through oversupply. People begin to take such accessibility for granted and stop appreciating the value being provided. Strategic silence operates on multiple levels simultaneously. At the surface level, it creates practical benefits. You avoid saying things you might regret. You give others space to reveal their true positions, and you maintain an air of thoughtfulness rather than reactivity. At deeper levels, it triggers psychological responses that work in your favor. People project wisdom onto your quiet observation. They compete for your limited attention, and they interpret your eventual words as more significant. I learned to distinguish between productive silence and mere absence. Productive silence is chosen, deliberate, and contextually. Remain quiet when speaking would diminish your position, or when others need space to make discoveries on their own. Mere absence is random, habitual, or fear-based. You withdraw because you do not know what to say, or because you are afraid of conflict. The timing of silence matters enormously. Speaking first in a negotiation often puts you at a disadvantage because you reveal your position before understanding others' priorities. Remaining quiet while others compete to fill the conversational vacuum gives you information you can use to craft more effective responses. The person who speaks last often speaks with the greatest impact because they have heard all other perspectives. I observed how the most influential leaders used what I call calibrated responsiveness. They varied their availability and engagement based on strategic considerations rather than simple politeness. When someone brought them a trivial matter, they might respond slowly or not at all, training that person to use their time more thoughtfully. When someone brought genuinely important business, they responded quickly and thoroughly, reinforcing the value of bringing worthy matters to their attention. Silence also serves as a powerful diagnostic tool for evaluating relationships and situations. When you stop initiating contact or providing input, you quickly discover who values your participation enough to seek it out versus who is simply taking advantage of your accessibility. The people who make effort to re-engage with you are revealing their true assessment of your worth. In meetings and negotiations, I learned that the person who is comfortable with silence often controls the conversation even when they speak least. Others feel compelled to fill quiet moments with words, often revealing more than they intended. By remaining calm and patient during pauses, you create pressure that causes others to elaborate, clarify, or make concessions they had not planned. To offer. The principle extends to written communication as well. The leader who responds to every email immediately trains others to expect instant availability and creates an obligation to be constantly reactive. The leader who responds thoughtfully at chosen intervals trains others to communicate more efficiently and creates space for strategic thinking between interactions. I discover that strategic silence must be balanced with strategic speech. When you do choose to break your silence, your words carry additional weight because they have been carefully chosen rather than spontaneously offered. This means that your occasional contributions can have disproportionate influence on decisions and discussions. The most sophisticated application involves using silence to create space for others to reach conclusions you want them to reach without direct persuasion. Instead of arguing for your position, you withhold your opinion while asking questions that guide others' thinking toward insights that serve your purposes. When they arrive at the right conclusion independently, they commit to it more strongly than if you had convinced them through argument. Learning to embrace strategic silence required overcoming my natural desire to share knowledge, correct misconceptions, and contribute to every discussion. I had to accept that being perceived as wise was often more valuable than demonstrating intelligence, and that influence could grow through restraint rather than activity. The transformation came when I realized that silence was not passive, but active. It was a choice that required as much skill and discipline as speaking well. The leader who masters both when to speak and when to remain quiet possesses a complete toolkit for influence that serves them in any situation they might encounter. As I worked on my Florentine histories, documenting the rise and fall of leaders across generations, I began to understand how the principles I had discovered could transform any individual from a powerless people-pleaser into a respected strategic actor. The transformation requires patience, practice, and a willingness to endure temporary discomfort for long-term effectiveness. The first step in this transformation is honest self-assessment, recognizing the specific ways that excessive niceness has limited your influence and created problems in your relationships and responsibilities. Most people are reluctant to acknowledge these patterns because they have convinced themselves that they're accommodating. Nature is purely virtuous rather than partly self-serving. I had to confront the uncomfortable truth that my own people-pleasing behavior was often motivated by fear of conflict and desire for approval rather than genuine concern for others' welfare. This recognition was humbling but necessary because you cannot change patterns you refuse to acknowledge. The leader who claims to be generous when they are actually conflict avoidant will continue making the same mistakes under different names. The second step involves setting boundaries gradually rather than attempting dramatic overnight changes. People who know you as endlessly accommodating will be surprised and possibly resistant when you begin saying no to unreasonable requests. If you shift too quickly, they may interpret your new behavior as temporary mood rather than permanent change, and they will test your resolve aggressively. Instead, I learned to choose small, low-stakes situations where I could practice standing firm without risking important relationships or major consequences. Each successful boundary enforcement builds confidence for handling larger challenges. Each time you say no and discover that the world does not end, It becomes easier to say no when the stakes are higher. The third step requires developing what I call strategic empathy, understanding others' motivations and constraints without automatically accommodating their preferences. This deeper comprehension allows you to craft responses that serve both your interests and theirs, rather than simply capitulating to their demands or rigidly rejecting their requests. Strategic empathy involves asking questions designed to understand the underlying needs behind surface requests. When someone asks for your time, money, or support, exploring why they need it and what alternatives they have considered often reveals opportunities for mutually beneficial solutions that would not have been apparent if you had simply said yes or no to their initial proposal. I learned to distinguish between people who deserved investment and people who deserved boundaries. Those who brought valuable ideas, demonstrated consistent competence, or supported your mission when it was difficult deserved generous treatment. Those who consistently drained resources without contributing value, who took advantage of your generosity, or who disappeared when you needed support, deserved firm boundaries regardless of their personal charm. The fourth step involves developing comfort with others' disappointment. This is often the most challenging aspect of the transformation, because people pleasers have usually spent years training others to expect unlimited accommodation. When you begin setting reasonable limits, some people will express frustration, guilt you about your selfishness, or claim that you have changed for the worse. Understanding that these reactions are predictable and temporary helps you persist through the discomfort. People who genuinely care about your welfare will adjust to your new boundaries and continue the relationship on healthier terms. People who are primarily interested in exploiting your accommodating nature will either adapt their approach or seek easier targets elsewhere. The fifth step requires replacing people-pleasing behaviors with value-creating behaviors. Instead of seeking approval through accommodation, you begin earning respect through competence and results. Instead of avoiding conflict through endless compromise, you begin addressing problems directly and efficiently. Instead of saying yes to everything, you begin saying yes enthusiastically to opportunities that align with your priorities. This transition often reveals how much time and energy you had been wasting on activities that served neither your interests nor any meaningful purpose. The boundaries that initially felt restrictive gradually feel liberating as you discover the satisfaction of focusing your resources on pursuits that generate real value and progress. The transformation is complete when you reach what I call strategic authenticity, the ability to be genuinely yourself while consciously choosing which aspects of yourself to emphasize in different situations. You no longer need to choose between being nice and being effective, because you have learned to be strategically nice in ways that enhance rather than undermine your influence. This integration allows you to maintain your core values while wielding them more skillfully. You can still be generous, but your generosity becomes more powerful because it is chosen rather than compelled. You can still be collaborative, but your collaboration becomes more effective because it is based on mutual respect rather than one-sided accommodation. You can still be kind, but your kindness becomes more meaningful because it is paired with competence and clear boundaries. In my final correspondence with Francesco Guicciardini, I reflected on how the principles that governed Renaissance politics apply with remarkable precision to modern workplace dynamics and professional relationships. The fundamental patterns of human behavior remain constant across centuries only. The contexts and consequences change in scale and speed. Today's corporate environments mirror the Italian city-states I knew so well. Complex networks of competing interests, shifting alliances, limited resources, and ambitious individuals seeking advancement. The executive who understands these dynamics and responds strategically will thrive, while the executive who relies solely on good intentions and hard work will find themselves perpetually frustrated by others' success. The The modern application begins with recognizing that your workplace operates according to unwritten rules that are often more powerful than official policies. Just as Renaissance courts had elaborate protocols for gaining access to powerful figures, contemporary organizations have informal networks that determine whose ideas receive serious consideration and whose contributions are valued most highly. The strategic professional maps these invisible power structures, just as I once mapped political alliances. Who influences key decisions? Which relationships facilitate or obstruct progress? What unspoken values actually drive behavior despite official mission statements? Understanding these realities allows you to navigate effectively rather than working against forces you do not recognize. The principle of productive enmity translates directly to modern competitive situations. The professional who tries to be universally liked eliminates the creative tension that drives innovation and the clarity that comes from taking positions on important issues. Strategic disagreement with respected colleagues can enhance your reputation more effectively than universal agreement, provided your opposition is thoughtful and your arguments are sound. Modern leaders must master the contemporary version of the lion and fox duality. Sometimes situations require direct communication about expectations, consequences, and non-negotiable standards. Other times they require subtle influence, careful questioning, and patient relationship building. The effective leader reads the context and chooses the appropriate approach rather than defaulting to a single style. Regardless of circumstances, the delegation of dirty work remains as relevant today as it was in Borges' time. Modern leaders who try to personally handle every difficult conversation, every unpopular decision, and every conflict resolution create bottlenecks that limit their effectiveness. Building systems and empowering capable team members to handle implementation allows leaders to focus on strategy while maintaining the relationships necessary for long-term success. Strategic silence has become even more powerful in an era of constant communication and social media noise. The professional who responds thoughtfully rather than immediately, who chooses words carefully rather than contributing to every discussion, and who maintains some mystery about their thinking process often commands more respect than those who make themselves constantly available. The reputation fortress principle applies with particular intensity in professional environments where perception often matters more than reality in determining opportunities and advancement. The modern professional must actively manage their personal brand, understanding that others will form opinions based on limited information and that these opinions will influence their career trajectory more than their actual competence might suggest. Building strategic relationships requires the same careful balance of charm and authority that I observed in successful Renaissance diplomats. Modern professionals must be genuinely interested in others while maintaining clear boundaries about their own time and resources. They must be helpful and collaborative while ensuring that their contributions are recognized and valued appropriately. The principle of strategic mercy translates into knowing when to forgive mistakes, overlook slights, and give second chances to colleagues who have disappointed you. But this forgiveness must be selective and purposeful, designed to build loyalty and demonstrate strength rather than simply avoiding conflict or appearing nice. Contemporary applications of these principles require understanding that business relationships are voluntary and utilitarian rather than permanent and emotional. People will work with you as long as doing so serves their interests, and they will seek alternatives when better opportunities arise. This is not cynical, it is realistic, and understanding it allows you to build more sustainable and mutually beneficial professional relationships. The transformation from workplace people pleaser to strategic professional follows the same pattern I described for any leadership context: gradual boundary setting, selective generosity, calculated availability, and consistent demonstration of competence paired with pleasant social skills. The goal is not to become ruthless or manipulative, but to become effective while maintaining your integrity and core values. The modern professional who masters these principles will find that their influence grows, their stress decreases, and their career opportunities multiply. They will discover that being strategically nice is more satisfying than being universally accommodating, and that respect based on competence is more durable than popularity based on convenience. As I put my final thoughts into the Prince manuscript, I reflected on the legacy I hoped to leave, not a manual for tyrants, but a guide for those who understand that effectiveness and virtue need not be enemies. The leader who masters strategic thinking can accomplish more good in the world than the leader who relies on good intentions alone. The principles I have shared with you are not merely tactical advice. They represent a fundamental understanding of human nature and social dynamics that has remained constant across centuries. People respond to strength, respect clarity, and value consistency. They follow those who can protect their interests and advance their welfare, not those who simply wish them well. My greatest insight was recognizing that the choice between being nice and being effective is a false dilemma created by those who do not understand the true nature of leadership. The most powerful leaders in history were often beloved by their people precisely because they were willing to make hard decisions that served the greater good. They were kind in their ultimate objectives while being firm in their methods. You now possess the same knowledge that guided emperors, shaped nations, and built lasting institutions. The question is not whether these principles worked centuries of application have proven their effectiveness. The question is whether you will have the courage to apply them when doing so requires you to disappoint others in small ways, to serve them in large ways. The transformation from people pleaser to strategic leader is not comfortable, but it is necessary for anyone who wants to create meaningful change in the world. The nice person who cannot enforce standards enables mediocrity. The generous person who cannot say no wastes resources that could have been invested in important missions. The accommodating person who avoids all conflict allows problems to grow until they become crises. Your journey begins with the next decision. You face where you must choose between being liked and being respected, between avoiding discomfort and creating value, between following the crowd and following your judgment. In that moment, remember that the people who shaped history were those who understood that leadership is not a popularity contest, but a responsibility to serve something larger than immediate approval. The world needs more leaders who combine strategic thinking with genuine care for others' welfare. It needs people who can be tough when toughness serves compassion, firm when firmness prevents chaos, and selective when selectivity enables greater generosity. It needs individuals who understand that the highest form of service sometimes requires the courage to be temporarily misunderstood. My legacy is not in the specific techniques I have described, but in the principle that underlies them all. Effectiveness in service of worthy goals is more virtuous than ineffectiveness motivated by good intentions. The leader who applies this understanding will discover that strategic action and moral purpose reinforce each other rather than competing. Take these insights and use them to build something worthy of the effort required to master them. Whether you lead a team, a family, or simply your own life, these principles will serve you well if you apply them with wisdom and commitment to something beyond your own immediate comfort. The nice guy finishes last because he refuses to understand the rules of the game he is playing. The strategic leader finishes first because he masters those rules while never losing sight of why the game matters. Choose to be strategic, choose to be effective, and choose to use your influence in service of purposes worthy of the power you will gain. Your transformation starts now.